welcome to everybody. My name is Judah Kohler. I have the privilege of being Associate Director of our Autism Center and chairing the graduate program here in special education. So first I want to welcome you all here this morning. When I look out at the people in this room, even among those faces that are familiar to me, I'm able to identify faculty members and researchers. I'm able to identify policymakers, people working in the public sector, clinical professionals, family members, and maybe most importantly, because of where we are physically today, students. That coming together, that interaction, that stimulation is exactly the point of what we do, or why we're here. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Professor Corey Schulman, the Director of the Autism Center.
Thank you, Judah. I'm going to try and do this without the microphone because I know that you can all hear me. And it really, really, really is much better for me. We have a really full day. And I will add to what Judah said and say that the fact that there are almost 100 people in this room is a very amazing thing to me as we began to organize this after a parallel conference decided to not happen only about 2 months ago. So you guys are wonderful and you have a very full packed day for you and we're excited that you're here. I am going to take about 3 minutes, actually 5 minutes, to tell you a little bit about our center. Those who have heard it before, I hope will do it quickly enough not to make it boring for you. But we really were the first autism center in Israel to be associated with the university. And I would like to tell you how we are in meeting our dream of advancing the field of autism in Israel and beyond. We did this and we're gonna try and show it. Whoops.
The Autism Center at Hebrew University is particularly effective because we work on several levels. We combine state-of-the-art research with clinical services, collaboration with the community, and training.
Autism is a multifaceted neurodevelopmental disorder. So if we're looking at the development of autism, we're understanding the mechanism of autism through one lens, we're just missing a lot of the picture. We need to work in an interdisciplinary fashion, fostering stimulation and conversation across fields. It's an amazing thing to look around the room and see experts in the area of genetics and neurobiology, education and social work, epidemiology and public health. Interacting with people from different disciplines and different faculties forces us to think outside the box. What's amazing and exciting is taking the knowledge that we gain from that cross-disciplinary stimulation and transferring it back to the community. That's why we work in close contact with NGOs, with government ministries, with the autistic community, with families of individuals with autism that tell us what are the questions we should be asking.
I think the center has brought an amazing dialogue between families, clinicians, researchers, people with autism. The center has given us a voice within this world of research and autism that's really given us a seat at the table.
We can see how what we're doing is advancing the field here in Jerusalem and beyond, and we're just getting started. We are training students so that they can be the leading clinicians and researchers in the science of autism.
As part of the Autism Center, I am exposed to so much more than my own research. Interacting with experts in different areas has caused me to think differently and more creatively about my own research.
We envision a richer, more informative research world in which collaboration allows us to respond to brain and behavior from the lab into the living room, trying to understand the complexity of autism.
The Autism Center is an essential aspect of what we do at the Hebrew University. It is essential for us to share this knowledge with the community around us to make our world a better place.
Together, the sum of which is much more than each of us individually. We can enrich the lives of people with autism and their family members.
So I'm just going to add to that a little bit and tell you a little bit more specifically about what it is that we're doing. We stand on 4 pillars: research, training, community, and clinical services. And we do have more than 30 members in more than 11 departments at Hebrew University. In the last few years, we have incorporated into Hebrew University more and more autism researchers, all of whom do join us at the center. And as you heard Batel speak, we have student scholarships and international conferences. This one that we're doing today, we do a lot of training with ATI and ADOS, and we look for training for community professionals. We have a hierarchy of courses for our students, from the more basic into much more advanced research seminars. We do education days, we collaborate with Alut, we collaborate with the Ministry of Health, we collaborate with the Ministry of Education, and we collaborate with the Ministry of Welfare, which is now moving into a new administration of disability, where autism is going to have to find its new home. And finally, we are trying to not duplicate services that exist, but rather find out where there are holes and do what we can do. So we are working with Hadassah for a school-age clinic, which actually is hard because people don't always understand that autism expresses itself differently at different ages, so that we're looking for things a little bit different in what we're doing at school-age children. We do have a program for people with autism who are learning at Hebrew University. They are exceptionally bright, outstanding people who have been accepted to Hebrew University on their own scholastic merit. Unfortunately, once they get to the university, it becomes very complex and difficult for them to be able to navigate the system. And working together with the university and the student dean's office, the office of the student, whatever it's called here, we actually are giving them support in a program that is supported by the rector and by Bituach Leumi and by us. And what we do as well is have a lot of very clear intervention research, which is what is going to be today in the continuation of what we do. Another thing that is exceptional in what we do is that we start with young children and diagnosis, but we go all across the lifestyle, and we go from lower functioning people to people who are studying here on their own merit. So we have a whole lot of very talented researchers who are working from basic science to applied sciences, and they are amazing people. We have publications and grants and students, and we do believe that this is a very viable adventure because it's not resting on any one person. We are bringing new staff in, new faculty, and we're bringing in money in order to support the research that we're doing. We have an international advisory board, which is made up of the leading people in autism around the world. And one of them today is going to end up being our first guest of what we hope will be a tradition of bringing those people here to see what we're doing and understand what we are doing, as well as learning from them. So without further ado, I am not going to introduce Coni yet, but I do have the privilege of introducing Professor Mona Hoy-Kasabri, who is the Dean of the School of Social Work, where our Autism Center is anchored. And she is an incredibly impressive human being, without whose support we could not do what we do. She has a PhD from social work from this institution, went on to do her postdoc at University of Chicago, and got a Fulbright scholarship. Her focus of her research is on economic, social, and political factors of children and youth involvement in delinquent and violent behavior. And she does what we do best. It is to understand things in a holistic, philosophy perspective, integrating the various factors of the larger social and cultural contexts. I have the pleasure of working in the School of Social Work, where Professor Ksabre is the dean. She made history when she became the first Arab woman who was a dean of a faculty at Hebrew University. And as such, she is a role model for all of us. So it really is my pleasure to ask Mona to come and welcome you. She's an amazing researcher, a member of the Global Young Academy, and a wonderful person. Mona.
I would like to speak to the microphone. Thank you, Cole, and I want to thank you all for coming here today. And I'm sorry, I'm speaking English because of our guest, and I believe the other presenters will speak in Hebrew. So I want to welcome you all here and to thank you for coming and participating in a very short notice. As Coni mentioned, she started just organizing that day like a month ago, even less. And I'm happy to see you all. It means a lot for us that you are here. It means also that the issue and the conference today, or the learning day, is very important to all of you. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Cori Schulman, the director of the center, for all the great work she does to make this center successful and with a great contribution to the research and practice field. I think that the collaboration and the combination of research and practice is very important in the School of Social Work, and the center is leading this model in its activity in that field. We are grateful and proud also of our national and international advisory board, that their involvement helps in advancing the field of autism in Israel and overall. One of those members is Professor Coni Ksabre. Your family is a little bit close to my family. What is your family name? Ksabre?
Kazri.
Kasri. Because mine is Ksabre, so you have...
Yeah, close.
That serves in the Center International Advisory Board. I would like to welcome our guest lecturer, Professor Coni Ksabre, from the University of California, Los Angeles. She is a leading researcher in the field of autism and a founding member of the Center for Autism Research and Trauma at UCLA. I was mostly proud by the number of PhD students that you have supervised, more than 60.
Including Mary. We're going to say that.
You are one. It's amazing, you know. I know you have done a lot of work, but this number I couldn't ignore, the 60 students. Yeah, more than, at least 60. Wow. Her research aims to develop novel evidence-based intervention implemented in community setting. Research projects include targeted treatment for early social communication development in at-risk infants, toddlers, and preschoolers with autism, and peer relationships for school-age children with autism. She leads several large multi-site studies, including a network on interventions for minimally verbal school-age children with ASD, and a network that aims to decrease disparities in interventions for children with ASD who are underrepresented in research trials. She is one of the Science Advisory Board of the Autism Speaks Foundation and regularly presents to both academic and practitioner audience locally, nationally, and internationally, and we are happy that we will be able to hear you today. She has contributed significantly to both academic and clinical knowledge in the field of autism. As such, I am extremely glad that she agreed to deliver this lecture today and that she will be with us here today. I very much look forward to hearing her speak. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you. This is my very first trip change out computers real quickly. Let's hope this works. Oops.
You need me to move my computer, Connie?
Did he take away the... There it is. Okay, this is hard to do without glasses on. I guess I could put them on. Okay, I'm ready.
Yeah,
I think so.
it's not on.
No, it will be in a second. They warned me not to do this, but here we are.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so I think when the conference was originally scheduled, I was going to talk sort of more broadly about research and personalization of intervention research. But now I've slanted the topic to just one treatment model that we developed at UCLA called Jasper. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for questions. So I've organized it so I'll talk about what the targets of intervention are, what the core components of Jasper are, and then what's the research basis for Jasper. So I know all of you probably know this. ASD is defined by these two core areas of challenge, social communication and restricted interest repetitive behaviors. We're actually going to focus on those core deficits in social communication. Turns out that there are quite a few interventions for social communication. There are very few effective interventions for restricted interest repetitive behaviors. And I think that that's a topic of something to think about in the future. But for now, we're going to focus in on social communication. And when I talk, am I talking fast? Am I okay? Yes? Too fast? Is that a yes or is that a no? It's okay, okay. Okay, good. So the core deficits that we talk about are joint engagement, play, communication, gestures, and language. And so why do we focus on those core deficits? Well, one is because language, and when I say language, I'm talking about speaking with spoken language and phrase speech. By the time you're 5 or 6 years of age, results in the best social outcomes for kids with autism. These are old data, but they've been replicated multiple times. Joint attention predicts to language. Do you know what joint attention is? Most of you do. So if you don't, it really refers to sharing gestures. So if you're in the park and you are with your child and your child sees an airplane flying overhead, they point to the airplane, they look back at you, and they look at the airplane. That's a sharing look and a point, a sharing point. They're not asking you to get the airplane, probably not anyway, right? So it's a sharing point. Whereas if they see something like cookies in the cupboard, they might point to the cupboard because they want the cookies. It's the same gesture, but the function is different. In this case, it would be a requesting gesture, right? So we distinguish between those two types of gestures. And it's the joint attention, the sharing gestures, that are really impaired in kids with autism. And then play skills are associated with cognitive abilities, so they're also important. So another reason why we focus on these core deficits is just the difficulty in engaging young children with autism. I'm going to show you some videos today. This little boy was just turning 3 years old. He had already had a year of applied behavior analysis. Anybody in the room do applied behavior analysis, ABA, type interventions? Yeah. So he'd already had a year of this, 20 hours a week, common in Los Angeles. And he didn't like to play. So his mother came to us saying, I can't play with him, I can't engage him. And so this is our very first Jasper session after his assessments. doesn't like to play? Do you have an idea why, what's going on here? Probably, right? Yeah, he's not liking the change. She's trying to expand the play to keep him engaged, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with that because this toy is completed when all the little figures are in place. And he's been taught this through ABA. Not just that, he has, you know, his personality or his sort of way of being is to be fairly rigid and want things his way. And so he wasn't happy with that. He doesn't really like to play. This is a dad working with his little guy, and he's trying to engage him in play. And this little one is about 2.5 here.
Austin's turn. Oh, Boston. Oh.
Right, so this little guy would be considered to be onlooking. He's kind of watching the activity, but he doesn't know how to enter into engagement with his dad. His dad is really responsive, like most parents. Most parents are really responsive to their kids. And so when we think about interventions for parents and kids, it's usually not about increasing responsiveness only. That's only a place to begin. But most of the studies I've done, parents are pretty highly responsive. So engagement, though, may be the most important outcome. And when we think about engagement, we think about the work of Lauren Adamson, who did a lot of work with typically developing language learning children. And so if you think about this developmentally, children at around 6 months of age are just beginning to move from being just person engaged to now being very object engaged, because they're learning to sit up and to move around, and they can't really combine objects and people together very well. But over the next several months, they are able to engage with a person and with an object. And that's where a lot of this joint engagement comes about. It's where a lot of joint attention gestures are developed. And so keeping children engaged with another person is a really important context for learning language. And in fact, Lauren's work shows this, that between 18 and 36 months, most of the time is spent in supported joint engagement. That's where kids are learning language. And what we're trying to go towards is coordinated joint engagement, where the child is really coordinating the interaction, leading the interaction. All right, so joint attention and joint engagement are two different constructs. And I think it's very confused in the literature in how people talk about this. So I'm going to try to unpack it a little bit. So joint attention refers really to gesture use, pointing, showing, giving to share, coordinated looks. And it's really used for that sort of sharing experience. It also involves commenting language. It's different from those requestive gestures, as I talked about earlier. And initiating joint attention is what is associated with language development in kids with autism. Responding to joint attention is too, but initiating in our studies has been the biggest predictor of later language. And then initiating joint attention is the most impaired in kids with autism. It's the hardest thing to teach. Joint engagement, and we really distinguish between parent-initiated and child-initiated. What we're looking for is child-initiated joint engagement. And this is, I have to put my glasses on because I can't see. It's really different from shared attention, right? So it does involve the coordination between objects and people. It's not just both people looking at the same object, and not necessarily aware of the other. So it requires this active participation between the parent and the child. And it's during this period of time, this joint engagement, where kids are going to show you more of these gestures and communicative intent and words. All right, I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about. So we have a baby project that just finished called Baby Jasper, which we haven't published yet. And we're starting another one, another Baby Jasper study. But from this first study, this was a mom with her little girl in a mother-child interaction that we use as part of our research, and we have a standard set of toys. So this baby chose this toy, and you'll see that mom is very responsive to her child. This is before intervention starts. Okay, now if you're just looking at this, you might say, oh, they're jointly engaged. They are not. The child is object engaged, and there are secondary indicators that tell us that that is the case. You see that the mom is saying, oh, put them on top, but the child doesn't put them on top. She goes back to exactly where she was before, on the pole, putting them on the pole. And then mom is flipping the little girl's hair to try to get some, connection. And so mom is responsive to the child, but they're not jointly engaged. Now, this is in treatment, and here you'll see that she's now jointly engaged. Let me see if you see the reasons why. Right, so you see some connection between mom and child looks up at mom, they're waiting, and they're playing together, right? And this treatment study was just, 20 sessions, I think, over 2 months. So this isn't even at the end of treatment. So it happens quickly, it's just tweaking little things with mom to help baby. So how do we do that? How do we successfully engage children? Well, we think about play level. Play is what kids do to learn about their world. And of course, we can segment play skills into 2 different kind of categories, functional play and symbolic play. Functional play goes from very simple play to combination play to pre-symbolic, and then you get into more of the imaginative symbolic play. But this is a baby. We're not expecting symbolic play, right? Developmentally, you wouldn't expect that. There's a very definite sequence of play skills for kids in general and typical development, and our kids with autism can follow this same sequence. So let me talk about that video, those videos you just saw. What was going on in the video in which they were more jointly engaged? We dropped down a play level. The mom now understands where her child was developmentally for play. She's at simple play. She's at discriminate acts, which is just hitting a drum. Very, very simple. And when she is at that simple level of play, she can now concentrate on actually engaging with mom. Because cognitively, she's not having to work so hard. Whereas in the first video, the baby chose those reins. And so she's trying really hard, but it's cognitively too taxing. So she cannot kind of focus on the object and mom together. You see that? And then at the, probably towards the end of treatment, she actually gets to pre-symbolic play. So I'll show you what they look like.
Sleep, baby, sleep.
She's starting to engage a little bit in pre-symbolic play in this kind of short period of time. And I actually have a video of her now at 4, which I forgot to put on here, but she's actually fluently talking. So this is a little girl with a clear diagnosis of autism, but they change a lot in a pretty short period of time. So how do we assess children for the intervention targets that we want to work on in Jasper? We, in research projects, we do longer independent assessments, the early social communication scale and the structured play assessment. But for determining targets, we take the items from both of those assessments, and they've been put together in this short play and communication evaluation by one of my graduate students, Stephanie Shire. And it's really to help a clinician or a teacher figure out what those targets are really quickly. It takes about 15 minutes, very easy to do. It's to understand what is a mastered level of play, what's an emerging skills in this area of play, but also joint attention and requesting. And then we can set targets through just a really brief observation. And it's a published study. It's not a kit to buy, it's a kit to make, and easy to do. Okay, so I'm moving quickly because I'm moving quickly. Okay, so what are the core components of Jasper? So Jasper stands for joint attention, symbolic play, engagement, and regulation. Those core impairments that we want to help kids work through. The core concepts then are sort of bigger areas of social communication, play, and engagement, and then there are core strategies. And those core strategies are important because that's how you sort of address these core domains. So we have environmental arrangement, imitation and modeling, routines and expansion, language techniques, and then we program for joint attention. And it's layered. So we don't expect that you learn this in one session or 2 or 3 sessions and then you're good to go, but that when we teach parents or teachers, we actually teach them week by week and we just layer in the information. And for you speech and language therapists, I know you'll be probably upset that language kind of comes at the end, but to focus in on what you're saying in a session is really hard. And then if we teach it early, that's all we focus on is what we're saying and not what we're doing. So we teach you to do, and then we teach you to talk in a particular way. So it's layered in. It targets those skills that we've already talked about. There are 3 core domains: play, communication gestures, and engagement. And then there are these core strategies. All right. So we start off with environmental arrangement, and environmental arrangement has to do with the assessment. Does the therapist, the parent, the teacher know what the child's play level is? Do you know what the child has mastered in terms of communication gestures and language? So you need to know those things in order to target the skills in the context of intervention. So we want to start at mastered skills, and we want to then target those emerging skills and move on up. For example, in environmental arrangement, it might be as simple as making sure that you're in a space that you can play either on the floor or at a table and chairs, depending on what kind of support the child needs. You want to be accessible to the child, so usually in front of the child. And you want to have toy choice. You want to have toys that are proximal that you can use. And how many toys depends on the kid. All right. So we have a lot of considerations with the environment. We have yourself. We have the structure. How much structure do you need? Does the child need to be in a chair? Does the child need to just be free on the floor? Toy arrangement has to do with the numbers of toys and the toy choice. Distractions, you want to minimize distractions to the extent that you need to for that particular child. So fairly simple, but not so easy to do. Okay, so let's talk about some of the research behind this. So Jasper falls into that naturalistic developmental behavioral intervention grouping of ABA. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. It came out as a reaction to the big machine of ABA in the United States, which was getting support from insurance companies, and they weren't including things like Jasper, they still don't, and other kinds of behavioral interventions, because you have a big, I don't know, big agency that is saying that there's only one ABA that's effective, and that's discrete trial training, which is the Lovas's method. Which of course, I don't know what you know about this, but that's kind of crazy. But it works, so it comes down to money. And so that grouping of naturalistic developmental behavioral interventions was put together to say, hey, these are more appropriate for young kids, right? They're more developmental, but they still you're still trying to change behavior, so they're still behavioral. So Jasper is targeted, it's modular. So we think of it as a comprehensive social communication module that you could add into any intervention. So I think that's important because with all of the marketing of interventions, especially in the United States, it's important that clinicians know there isn't a single effective intervention. And that you can be eclectic and informed in the ways in which you approach intervention to have maximum benefit for kids. And I would encourage everyone to have multiple tools in your toolbox so that you can pull those out for particular kids that you might have, whether you're in a school or in a clinic or wherever you are. That being said, parents have one kid, and all they need to know is what they should be doing with that one kid. But therapists need to have multiple tools. We expect that effects will be noticed pretty quickly in Jasper. I don't think we get buy-in from anybody if you don't see effects pretty much in the first session. So that's what we go for. I think that the evidence does suggest that approach matters for improvements in some core deficits, like joint attention, play, and engagement. I think NDBI interventions are better at this than the more classic ABA and verbal behavior interventions, which haven't shown good effects on joint attention in terms of generalization and needs. And especially if we're talking about things that are coming from the child that are spontaneous. So I'm going to show you differences just in teaching play. One of my collaborations for many years was with Tristram Smith, who was a Lovas person, and he published the only randomized controlled trial of discrete trial training. And he was a wonderful colleague. He was very flexible in his thinking. He unfortunately died about a year ago, much too early. But together we had done this study on comparing discrete trial training to Jasper with minimally verbal or low language preschoolers in schools. And so we saw about 164 kids across 3 sites. And I'm going to show you 2 little boys that are both 4 years old. They both had fewer than 5 words in their repertoire. One of them got randomized to DTT, one of them got randomized to Jasper. Their IQs are about the same, they're kind of mid-50s. So those are all important characteristics of kids who did well in DTT and in Jasper, both. But this little guy got randomized to DTT, and we did the structured play assessment with him in school before we started. And this was what he did before we started. Whoops, he just disappeared. Where'd he go? Let's see. So lots of sharing looks with him to start with. Plus he's doing that's functional play. He's trying to feed the doll, that's functional. But he's looking at the person, so he's coordinated joint looks, and I think that's important. He has some joint attention to begin with, and he has some functional play to begin with. So this treatment was done every day in school for about an hour for 4 months, and then the last 2 months we started babying out at school and going to home. This is 4 months, so into 4 months at school, and these are the symbolic play targets for DTT.
Answer solid. You got it. Do this. Pretend to be T-Rex. Yeah, bud. Pretend book is piano. Right, so one more time. Pretend book is piano. Wow, it's working.
So that's modern day DTT. It's not aversive, right? Looks okay. But does that look like play? No, I would agree. This was an ongoing conversation Tris and I would have. That is not play. Those ideas are coming from the therapist. Like, can you imagine this child going up to a peer and saying, let's pretend books are pianos? That would be weird, right? Do you have a question? Yeah? Yeah?
I just want to say, not generalize too much. I'm as a ACBA speaking, not generalize too much. For me, when I do ABA and teaching play to young kids, it doesn't look like that at all.
Good.
It's not easy. We use classes to example our school teachers. So just,
Okay, well, we can have a lot of conversations. I talk to BCBAs all the time, and that's great. You're modern. I love that. But these are low losses and Tris's goals, and I see them all the time. So if you have more tools in your toolbox, perfect. But this is DTT. But it's done without edibles, and it's done in a modern way, so it's not bad. I just don't think it's particularly good for play in this fashion. But this little guy made tons of progress, regardless. And if you're high enough, if you're connected enough, you can put it together. Even being taught this way, you can then become much more flexible. So I'm not completely anti-DTT if we use it. So this was the other little guy who's 4. Again, fewer than 5 words, lives, the play assessment. Okay, so he's got kind of some jargon, but he also shows to the camera person. That's a joint attention gesture, so that's also important. And this is this little guy, 4 months into treatment, and he's in his school library. He's wearing the same clothes. I know, because he has autism. He loves those clothes. They got smaller over the course of 4 months. But he loves them.
I see the tiles. Where's the treasure? Let's find the treasure. There she is. Oh, there's the treasure. Ah. Oh, I got the money. Oh, I have money too. You have coins. Oh, I have coins too. Yeah. Oh, I have so much treasure. Let's find it. Tile for my birthday. I see a birthday. Everything's smooth as smooth. Oh, Katie. Say the pirates. Yes, you. Say the pirates. It's your birthday. Yes, let's run this up. And there's on tiles. I see lots of tiles. Oh, the pirates crushed it.
So they would play for 45 minutes, all connected, and it looks just like they're playing, right? But there are a lot of strategies being used.
Stop! Let's
And
Stars.
shows joint attention.
Oh, I see the treasure. The details and buckets.
What is it?
The tile's trashy.
Oh, the tiles are trashed? Oh, crashed. Still needs speech therapy.
Necklace. I have a necklace. Oh.
Okay, so you should see both the developmental and behavioral strategies, but the goal is to get kids into more conversation and into play that's spontaneous. And so we've done a number of trials, I think 10, a couple outside the lab, and the findings are replicable. So whether we use therapists or teachers or parents, we always get an increase in joint engagement. We get an increase in play skills, but that varies based on the kid's development. It might be functional play for really little kids and symbolic play with older kids. And then joint attention, the same thing, responding to joint attention first, and then initiating joint attention. And the Jasper model is based on a study started in 1999, which I realize probably some of you might not have been born yet. But we did a study where kids came into an outpatient unit at UCLA. They were only there for about 6 weeks. But we saw that we randomized them as they came in. They either got a joint attention intervention or a play intervention, or they got just the ABA program of 30 hours a week, all kids. And so this was the first time we tried to actually teach joint attention. Because, like, how do you teach joint attention? We don't have to do this with typical kids. There were no examples of this in the literature, so we kind of used our best guess by combining what was out there: developmental strategies, behavioral strategies. And what we found was that if you taught something, you actually got a result. So the joint attention group increased in joint attention. The play group also increased in joint attention, but the ABA group, the bottom line, really didn't change over the 6 weeks or the 6-month follow-up or the 12-month follow-up. Play level increased for the kids getting the play intervention. It also increased for the kids getting the joint attention intervention, and it didn't change very much for kids getting ABA. So, but why do we focus in on joint attention and play? It's because we're trying to change something downstream in development. So, language outcomes. And so what we got over a 12-month follow-up was 15 to 17 months gain in language on a standardized test versus about 7.5 months for the kids who got the ABA only. And it wasn't as if when the kids left the unit, they weren't getting hours. They got up to 46 hours per week of treatment. I know it's probably unheard of in Israel. It's crazy. I think it's crazy. Even more importantly, some of the kids with lower language levels through the 5 words improved more if they got the joint attention intervention. So theoretically, that fits with the idea that you change joint attention, you get language outcomes. We also, from the study, had generalization to the moms who were not in this first study. So it was done by therapists. Moms dropped the kids off. They didn't even necessarily know what group their kids were in. But the kids had changed, and the moms are responsive. And so it looked like, there was more joint engagement with mom and child. There was also prediction over 4 years. So that kind of training, that early developmental training, is probably really important for changing the trajectory of kids. Because we were really interested in the kids who didn't have very much language, we thought, okay, let's do parent-mediated interventions and with toddlers, because they wouldn't have much intervention in 2003. Well, in LA, they still have intervention, so that wasn't completely true. But what we did was we taught parents by layering in these strategies in phases over 12 weeks. So one phase for the first 3 weeks, another, and another. Right? And the first study found, again, now our outcome is joint engagement. So you can see that in this waitlist design, in this pilot study, parents who got trained actually improved in getting their, they improved strategies, but they got their kids more jointly engaged over 8 weeks, and then a 3-month follow-up. So this was a teeny tiny study, 38 kids. We also got more functional play and more responding to joint attention. These were 2 to 3 year olds. But then the next studies, we didn't want to do wait lists. We didn't want to give parents nothing, which I think is an important consideration. So when people say that they want to do a comparison in a randomized trial, it's probably important to give 2 viable interventions in this day and age. So we gave an evidence-based parent stress reduction intervention and information sharing. We also gave them a lot of Jasper information, but we just met with the parent for 3 months. And then, but the other arm was to do hands-on coaching with parents. And in this study, what we found was that we had to do the hands-on training with parents to get changes in kids. It's not enough to just give information, which is unfortunate. We were hoping, actually, that we might find similar effects because it's much more cost-effective to just give out information. This was a larger study, again, 2 to 3 year olds, 86 children, comparing those 2 different interventions, 20 sessions over 10 weeks, a 6-month follow-up. And here, so we're really interested in, of course, joint engagement, but play diversity. How flexible is the play? How many different kinds of play can you do within a level of play? Not just the frequency, not just increasing the level. Although we did increase play level. But what was interesting is the parents who got the information sharing, they actually reduced their stress. Our parents in Jasper, they didn't increase stress, but they definitely didn't decrease. So I think that's something to think about. We might want to combine the 2, yes. The same parent in the meeting, so twice.
For example, a kid has a father and mother. When you talk to the parents, you use the exact same one every meeting, or?
Yeah, one of them would designate themselves as, or they could both come. We're open to that. We had a few fathers, so they weren't all moms.
Always the same
parent. Yeah, whoever could do that. And this was at the clinic, so this wasn't, in the community. But I have done studies in the community. So this was a study of preschoolers, again, in the community, and they were low-resource preschoolers across 5 sites in the United States. It was 112 kiddos. And again, hands-on mattered. Even when we did parent education, again, it's a parent education versus Jasper. Even when we would do the education in the community as well. So in this case, because the kids are older, we got increases in joint engagement, in symbolic play, and initiating joint attention. All right. So we've done, a few other trials, which I'm not going to talk about with parents, but we've also extended this to teachers. So I do a lot of work in the community because nobody wants to come into UCLA. It's really hard. The parking is hard. The traffic is hard. So we go out to parents or to teachers or to schools. So in one study, which was teacher implemented, so we taught teachers to implement Jasper. This was a moderate-sized study, 66 students, 3 to 5. 69% are minorities, so in LA, that's mostly Latino families. And what we were interested here was giving teachers something that they could actually do within the context of whatever their situation was. So there were 6 different centers across Los Angeles Unified School District, and they had rotations. So they would have a play rotation center, and that's where we placed Jasper. And what we found was that teacher strategy implementation, so the black lines are the ones who got Jasper, the other color, gray, I think, are the waitlist group. So in schools, sometimes you do have to do a wait list because they want everybody to get the treatment. They don't necessarily want a sham treatment, so you better give them something that's going to work or has a possibility to work. And here, joint engagement was also improved for kids who got the Jasper in immediate treatment. We also got cognitive test improvements at the follow-up for the Jasper group over the waitlist group. Right, so both proximal and distal outcomes. In another study, now again with toddlers, this one in New York City, in Harlem and Bronx, for those of you who've been to New York, so in low-resourced communities or areas of New York City. And this one is an interesting center because they have teaching assistants or paraprofessionals from the community who are paired one-on-one with each toddler that comes in. Each toddler comes in for 2 hours a day. They have 5 groups a day. These TAs work really hard, but they are non-professionals. So we taught them Jasper strategies to use one-on-one. And again, you can see that the black line are the Jasper training TAs versus the dotted line, which are the paraprofessionals waiting to get the treatment. And child outcomes also improved on, this is child-initiated joint engagement. We also got initiating joint attention and word combinations increasing for kids in the Jasper group. Now these are 2-year-olds that are coming in with 0 language. So, you know, we're just trying to get any words at the end of treatment. We've also just completed another study trying to, this was a hard one. They have a curriculum that they use in the preschools in LA that they pay thousands and thousands of dollars for. These are preschools all with disabilities, but the curriculum is a typical curriculum. So the base of the curriculum is too high for a lot of our kids. So we adapted the curriculum with Jasper strategies and targets. So I'm going to show you a little video. This is a teacher. She's working in a small group, one-on-one with children, but there's really little evidence of much social communication. So she's working with each kid one-on-one, right? But the other kid is just kind of hanging out in the meantime. So that was an entry, and this is her after some Jasper training, trying to work with all 4 of these kids. You know, it's not easy. These teachers have a pretty tough time trying to do it.
Ask your friends. Friends too. Ask your friends. Wait, you gotta look.
So she's trying to prompt more social communication. That's the main point. So it's really low-hanging fruit, guys. We're trying. So we've also done work with minimally verbal kids. These are kids with fewer than 20 words. We're late now. So.
No, we're not actually. It's fine. You certainly have another 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
I'm going to talk fast.
Yes, let's say 10 minutes.
Well, okay. You can cut me off at any time.
No.
I'm okay. So we did a study with 5 to 8-year-old kids who were classified as minimally verbal because they had fewer than 20 functional words. This was a study where the question for us was, can we improve spoken language if we give them an augmentative system? In this case, it was a Dynabox, because at the time that I started this study, iPads weren't that available, but in the course of this study, iPads became more available. We used software Proloco to go. It's just an icon with a picture. You press the picture, it says the word. So half the kids got randomized to receive Jasper plus a very behavioral language intervention, EMT, versus just Jasper alone. Not Jasper alone, Jasper EMT, augmentative system or not. I've done way too many studies that I can't remember even what the trial is, sorry. It's really the idea here is that we know that one treatment's not going to work for all kids. And so we're going to think about sequencing treatments. In this case, you either get the augmentative device or you don't. And then we're going to change after a period of time, depending on your response. So this is an adaptive treatment design. It's really thinking about using a sequence of decision rules to think about how, when, and based on what measures to alter something about the treatment, whether it's the dose or what you're doing. It can be anything. And so you end up with a sequence of treatments. It looks something like this. So here you have the Jasper with and without the augmentative device. And after 3 months, so it's 12 weeks. Yeah, I'll show you. I think it's better to show you. And then we would determine if you were a responder or not. And this was the first one that we did. So we had like 14 measures, which is crazy, 7 assessments, 14 different variables. Crazy, we don't do that anymore. But we determined if you could make 25% gain in this first 12 weeks on the outcome, which is socially communicative utterances, based on a language sample that was independent, that you were a responder. And if you were a responder, you stayed on the same course for the next 3 months. If you were a slow responder, then you would either get more sessions a week, 3 sessions, not 2, or you would also get the device if you didn't have the device before. Okay, that's the main design. And what we found, I'm still going to show you, what we found was that if you got the device, you have more spoken words, socially related, social communicative utterances, if you got the device in that first 3 months. Look at the jump in words. It's like on average 60 new words spoken, not augmented, 10% were augmented. So the red line on the bottom are kids getting Jasper EMT alone. They're making slow and steady progress, but they're making much faster progress with the addition of the device. And so that was a bit of a surprise to us, but good. And I don't know the answer for why that is. We have some hypotheses. The kids that got the device also had more novel words and more commenting language. So that was also novel for kids in this age range, 5 to 8. Most people just teach requesting, the outcome is requesting. Our outcome was more joint attention. So I'm going to show you, in the presence of time, I'm going to show you a younger kid, although I have older kids. These were 5 to 8-year-old kids. The device is used just to model on it. We don't prompt kids. We will prompt kids, but we don't do it unless we have to. So remember the little boy crying, that first session? So the very next day, the very next session, we changed some things. We changed child toy choice, and we brought in an iPad with Proloco on it, with just a few icons. And you'll see the therapist trying to just model and the child's behavior.
People on ground. People on ground.
So she's expanding his language on the device, but he already is using 2 buttons. This is day 2, literally. So having that visual system for him was super important. And I don't have the beginning of the session, but she will maybe model on it, people on as she's doing something with him, but you can see that he's taken off with that. Taken off, he's using 2 buttons. We're still working on language with him, so this is a couple weeks later.
Black. Here's brown. Brown. On. Brown on. On.
So we're still trying to get him to talk. Now he came in with 0 words, no words. And so now he's 7. He used an iPad for about 4 years. Is that right? No, 3 years. that he used to repair and he used to communicate. He still was pretty minimally verbal. But at 7, so this is on Mother's Day this year.
And Dr. Connie, I think Mother's Day.
Oh.
Semester, Katie is fun.
His therapist. Right? So he can talk. Yeah, he can talk. And I think for a lot of kids, they can talk. And it's much more efficient. I mean, it's fine to use the iPad or the augmentative system, but it's more efficient to talk if you can.
How often does she touch? Because every time she does an action, she
Not every action. You don't press the button every time, but you want to get to it about once every 30 seconds or so. You want to do something. Frequent. Well, you're doing something all the time. It depends on the pacing of the kid, so that's why I'm hedging. You want to have that conversation. You don't have to press the button every time. And not all kids take to it. And so even in that study, some of the kids didn't need an augmentative device. I mean, but they still benefited, I think, from the visual organization. And the fact that when you do press the device, it says the word exactly the same. When we talk, we change our intonation all the time. So I have lots of videos of using the iPad. So we have kids who transition, just use it transitionally to help them, and then they drop it as soon as they don't need it. So I think it's worth trying. Oh goodness. Okay, conclusion. Aha. So we know some things, right? We know that we can change core impairments, we can improve meaningful outcomes for kids. It does matter to teach other people, like parents and teachers, even peers, which I didn't talk about. And we have evidence of generalization and longer term outcomes. But we have so much that we still don't know. So we don't have a lot of information on what the active ingredients are the components of JASPER-R. We've done one active ingredient study on parent-mediated JASPER, where we do know that pacing matters, and that matters for outcomes. So we want to think about doing smart designs and dismantling studies in the future. We want to think about how we personalize treatments, adaptive designs, thinking about delivering a treatment just when it's needed. So if you don't need, there are lots of treatments, like let's take DTT. Maybe when you have a 2-year-old, you don't want to do DTT, you want to do JASPER. But that doesn't mean that later you don't want to do DTT, right? So what works now may not work later, and what works are, well, the opposite of that. I can't think about one. Right, so you want to think about the sequencing. And then we want to think about how we can disseminate interventions that are effective into the community. And we do something called a hybrid implementation model, which means that we're concerned about implementation, but we're still looking at child outcomes. I don't need to change a teacher's behavior or a parent's behavior if it doesn't have an effect on the child. It's the child. That's the reason they're coming for treatment. And then next for us, I have 5 new grants. I should be happy, except that I'm dying at the moment. So I'm really trying to think about different methodologies to answer questions about moderators and the active treatment components, why something might work or not work for individual kids, knowing that we have a spectrum. And there's tons of heterogeneity, even amongst the minimally verbal. So I have studies where we're looking at timing to determine response. How fast can we determine that someone's making a good response or not, and change something to put them on a faster trajectory. Step care models, and then really focusing on subgroups. So minimally verbal versus pre-verbal. We have studies on girls, other kinds of genetic syndromes. And so I have a bunch of different designs. Those are 4 of them. Which are crazy. They're all adaptive or smart designs, hoping that we can better understand why we do what we do, and what works and what doesn't work. Thank you.
We have time for 5 minutes of questions and only 5 minutes of questions. I'm really sorry. While I change the computers. And if there's not, then we're gonna just let Connie show us more movies.
But then we asked some questions before,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sure that some of you do have questions. Yes? No?
Yeah, you've got a question.
There, yes.
Sensory profile, that would make it more accessible to the child, just a regular playing. How loud should you be?
So I think therapists all the time think about, pacing and all aspects of the environment. In terms of sensory, yes, there are kids that have real sensory needs, and we have strategies that we use with kids. We also, I just had a little guy that is in a DIR program. He's 9 years old. He came to us for help, and because he throws himself on the ground every time that he doesn't get his way. He gets a sensory diet, 40 minutes a day, 3 times a day, 40 minutes, 3 times a day. And he was using it for escape. So he may have sensory needs. I actually don't think he's anxious. I don't think he has as many sensory issues as what was reported. And over a week of doing treatment with him, he made lots of progress, and we didn't have any behavioral problems after he bit me. After the second day. And the reason is because he's a reader. And he was bored to death. He was not being challenged, so we actually did a reading intervention with him. And I think that was a lot of his problems, that he was just using escapes. So I think there's so many things to think about, sort of behaviorally and the environment. There's just a million things. And I think you want to think about all those. You want to be open-minded with enough tools that you can address what's going on. And if you don't know, you can ask for help. I actually brought in a reading specialist because that's not my area. But it made a huge difference for this little guy.
One more question?
Yes.
Could you share some of your hypotheses for what is a higher outcome for verbal expressive language with Jasper plus AC versus Jasper alone? So you have some hypotheses.
Oh, well, so the reason that people think the augmentative device would work is that you've got the visual, you've got the same auditory input, and you've got the motor component. And so I can't disentangle those. They may have all been important, and there may be things that we haven't thought about.
One might be important for one kid and another one might
Yeah,
be
it
for
might
another
be.
kid.
That's right, it could be different for different kids. One of my new studies is, do you guys know this prompt method, oral motor? You speech people probably know it. So it's never really been tested, ever, in autism, and rigorously anyway. So we're actually got funded to do Jasper plus prompt versus Jasper alone for kids that are preschoolers but not really talking. And so I'm excited about that because I think that that could be a really great combo intervention. And our outcomes are both oral motor outcomes and of course, language outcomes. But I think being able to measure some of the oral motor issues that kids have is going to be super important. We partnered with somebody at Boston University who does this work, not in autism. And he looked at my videos and said how unstable my minimally verbal kids' jaws were. You speech people probably know this. So anyway, I think that that'll be kind of exciting.